Sarah Martinez stared at the stack of overdue bills scattered across her kitchen table, the red "Final Notice" stamps seeming to mock her in the dim morning light. 3 months since her husband David's funeral, and the medical debt from his cancer treatment was drowning her. Her military pension barely covered groceries, let alone the mortgage on their small ranch house outside Phoenix. The phone rang, cutting through the silence. "Martinez Aviation Services," she answered, trying to sound professional, despite running her one-woman repair business out of her garage. "We need someone for emergency aircraft maintenance." The voice was crisp, impatient. "Hangar 7 at Scottsdale Executive Airport. Can you be here in an hour?" Sarah glanced at her calendar, completely empty. "What kind of aircraft?" "Corporate." "Jet. Electrical issues. Our regular team is tied up." Something in the man's tone suggested more than he was saying, but Sarah needed the work. "I'll be there." As she loaded her worn toolbox into her battered pickup truck, Sarah caught her reflection in the side mirror. The woman staring back looked older than her 42 years. Desert sun had weathered her face, and grief had carved new lines around her eyes. Her Air Force jacket, faded from 3 tours in Afghanistan, hung loose on her diminished frame. The drive to Scottsdale Executive felt like entering another world. Pristine hangars lined the tarmac, each housing aircraft worth more than most people's homes. Sarah's truck looked pathetic among the luxury cars in the parking lot, sleek BMWs, Mercedes and Teslas that probably cost more than she'd make in 5 years. Hangar 7 was a cathedral of polished concrete and gleaming metal. Inside, a magnificent Gulfstream G650 sat like a wounded bird, surrounded by a cluster of men in expensive suits. They looked up as Sarah entered, their expressions shifting from expectation to barely concealed disappointment. "You're the mechanic?" asked a tall man with silver hair and a Rolex that caught the overhead lights. His tone carried the kind of dismissal Sarah had heard too many times since leaving the service. "Sarah Martinez?" "Yes, sir." She kept her voice steady, professional. "What seems to be the problem?" The man, his badge read Trevor Blackwood, Senior Operations Manager, gestured toward the jet with obvious frustration. "Intermittent electrical failures. Every diagnostic we run comes back clean, but the moment we try to take her up, she shuts down completely. We've had 3 different engineering teams look at her over the past 2 weeks." Sarah approached the aircraft, running her eyes over its sleek lines. Even grounded, the Gulfstream radiated power and luxury. "Mind if I take a look?" Trevor's laugh held no humor. "Be my guest, though I'm not sure what you expect to find that MIT-trained engineers missed." As Sarah began her inspection, she felt the familiar weight of skeptical eyes. The whispered conversations weren't quite quiet enough to miss. Desperate times, scraping the bottom of the barrel. "What's next?" asking the janitor. But as her hands moved over the aircraft systems, something else took over. The methodical, patient approach that had kept birds flying in the most hostile conditions on Earth. In Kandahar, a grounded aircraft meant stranded troops or delayed medical evacuations. There was no room for ego, only solutions. Near the avionics bay, Sarah paused. Her fingertips detected something the expensive diagnostic equipment had missed. A subtle vibration, barely perceptible, that pulsed in an irregular rhythm. She closed her eyes, listening to the aircraft's heartbeat the way her old crew chief had taught her. "Found something," she said quietly. The hangar fell silent. Trevor moved closer, his skepticism warring with desperate hope. "What is it?" Sarah knelt beside a small access panel, her weathered hands steady as she began to remove the cover. Sometimes the old ways work better than the new ones, sir. Sometimes you have to feel what the machine is trying to tell you. As the panel came free, revealing the complex web of wiring beneath, Sarah's trained eye immediately spotted what no computer had detected: a hairline crack in a critical distribution bracket, so small it would only cause problems under specific conditions. The crack that would change everything. David versus Goliath. That's impossible. Trevor's voice cracked as he stared at the tiny fissure Sarah had exposed. Our diagnostic equipment would have caught that. Sarah gently probed the damaged bracket with a small tool. Not necessarily. This kind of microfracture only causes problems under load. When the engines spin up, the vibration creates just enough movement to interrupt the electrical flow. Your diagnostics probably ran with engines off. A younger engineer in a pristine lab coat scoffed. "Ma'am, I've got degrees from Stanford and Caltech. I've been doing this for 15 years. That little crack couldn't possibly ground every aircraft I worked on in Afghanistan," Sarah interrupted quietly, her voice carrying the weight of experience. "Seen it before." Trevor's face flushed red. The Gulfstream belonged to Marcus Carlyle, a tech billionaire whose patience had run out days ago. Every day the jet sat grounded cost tens of thousands in lost business opportunities. You're telling me that a crack we can barely see with a magnifying glass has stumped our entire engineering team? Sometimes the simple answer is the right one. Sarah stood, wiping her hands on a shop rag. "I can fabricate a temporary fix that'll get her flying while you order a replacement bracket. Take maybe 2 hours." The hangar erupted in murmurs. The Stanford engineer, his badge read Dr. Richard Hoffman, stepped forward with barely contained indignation. "Mr. Blackwood, surely we're not going to trust a $50 million aircraft to some improvised repair by someone without proper certification." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Not proper certification. After 15 years keeping multi-million-dollar military aircraft operational in combat zones, after 3 tours where her skills meant the difference between life and death for countless soldiers, she wasn't properly certified for civilian work. Trevor's expression shifted, uncertainty replacing desperation. What kind of fix exactly? Reinforced clamp system with precision soldering to bypass the compromised junction, Sarah explained. "It's not permanent, but it'll hold until you get the right part." "I've done it before," Dr. Hoffman laughed coldly. "In some Afghan desert on a 20-year-old military transport, maybe. This is precision aviation engineering, not battlefield repairs with duct tape and prayers." Sarah felt her jaw tighten. The casual dismissal of her service, the assumption that military work was somehow less sophisticated than civilian aviation, burned in her chest. But she'd learned long ago that arguing rarely changed minds. Results did. "Your choice," she said, simply. "But that jet isn't flying anywhere until someone fixes that bracket." Trevor looked between Sarah and Dr. Hoffman, the weight of his decision obvious. In the corner, Sarah noticed a younger mechanic watching the exchange with interest. His name tag read James Chen, and something in his expression suggested he wasn't entirely convinced by Hoffman's dismissal. "How long did you say?" Trevor asked, his voice barely above a whisper. 2 hours, maybe 3. Sarah met his gaze steadily. "And I guarantee it'll work." Dr. Hoffman stepped closer to Trevor, his voice low but not quite quiet enough. "If she damages anything, if there's any kind of accident, the insurance implications alone will—" "I'll take full responsibility," Sarah interrupted. "Put it in writing if you want. Any damage caused by my repair, I'll cover personally." It was a massive gamble. Sarah's entire net worth wouldn't cover the cost of a minor paint scratch on the Gulfstream, let alone serious damage. But she diagnosed the problem correctly. She was certain of it. The same instincts that had kept her alive in combat zones weren't going to fail her now. Trevor stared at her for a long moment, weighing the risks. Outside, she could hear the rumble of other aircraft, taking off, the sound of business continuing while his remained grounded. Finally, he nodded. "Do it. But I'm holding you to that guarantee." As Sarah began setting up her equipment, she caught Dr. Hoffman whispering urgently into his phone. Something about liability concerns and unqualified personnel. The younger, mechanic James approached hesitantly. "Need a hand?" he asked quietly. "I was Army before this, helicopter maintenance." Sarah smiled for the first time in weeks. Maybe she wasn't completely alone after all. 2 hours later, Sarah stepped back from the Gulf Stream, sweat beading on her forehead, despite the hangar's air conditioning. Her improvised bracket repair gleamed under the lights, a carefully engineered solution that bridged the damaged component with military precision. "Fire her up," she told Trevor, who stood nearby with a tablet displaying the jet's diagnostic systems. The engines spooled to life with a deep, powerful hum. Sarah watched the instrument panels like a hawk, every gauge and warning light under scrutiny. Green across the board, the electrical systems held steady as power increased. "Well, I'll be damned," James muttered, grinning as he monitored the readings. But Dr. Hoffman wasn't finished. As the engines wound down after the successful test, he approached Trevor with a thick folder of paperwork. "I've been reviewing our insurance policies and FAA regulations. This repair," he gestured dismissively at Sarah's work, "violates at least 6 federal aviation standards. If anything happens to this aircraft, we're looking at criminal liability, not just civil." Sarah felt the familiar knot forming in her stomach. She'd seen this before, the moving goalposts, the sudden discovery of regulations that somehow only applied when inconvenient people succeeded where the right people had failed. "What regulations specifically?" she asked. Hoffman flipped through pages with theatrical precision. Part 145 repair station requirements, Part 43 maintenance standards, Part 65 mechanic certification protocols. Shall I continue? "This aircraft cannot legally fly with unauthorized modifications performed by unlicensed personnel." Trevor's face paled. "But the repair works. You saw the diagnostics." "Irrelevant," Hoffman snapped. "The law is the law. I've already contacted our legal department. They're recommending we remove the unauthorized repair immediately and find a certified solution." Sarah stared at the paperwork Hoffman brandished like a weapon. 15 years of keeping aircraft operational in active combat zones, and now she was unauthorized to touch a civilian jet. The bitter irony wasn't lost on her. She'd been certified to maintain aircraft that carried weapons of war, but not luxury transports for billionaires. "How long will that take?" Trevor asked. "At least another week, maybe 2. We'll need to source the proper bracket and have it installed by certified technicians following all appropriate protocols." "A week?" Trevor's voice cracked. "Mr. Carlyle has meetings in Singapore tomorrow. He's already postponed twice because of this situation." Hoffman shrugged with practiced indifference. "Better than facing federal prosecution for operating an aircraft with illegal modifications." Sarah watched the exchange with growing anger. Not at Trevor. He was caught between regulatory rock and a hard place. Not even at the regulations themselves, which existed for good reasons. Her anger was reserved for Hoffman and his weaponized bureaucracy, his use of rules as clubs to beat down anyone who didn't fit his narrow definition of qualified. "There's another option," she said quietly. Both men turned to her. Hoffman's expression was triumphant, expecting her to back down. Trevor looked desperate, grasping for any solution. I can get certified tonight if necessary. I've got military equivalencies for most civilian ratings, just never bothered with the paperwork because nobody would hire me anyway. Hoffman's smirk faltered. The testing centers are closed. Earliest appointment would be emergency certification review, Sarah interrupted. FAA district office handles them 24/7 for critical situations. I know because I've done it before for contract work. She was bluffing, partially. The emergency review process existed, but she'd never actually used it. Still, something in her tone made Hoffman hesitate. Even if that were possible, he said slowly, the review process takes days, not hours. Not for military conversions. With active security clearances, Sarah replied, her confidence growing as she remembered details from conversations with other veteran mechanics. Expedited review for personnel with documented combat aviation experience, especially if there's economic justification. Trevor's eyes lit up. How long? If I leave now, drive to the FAA office in Phoenix, and they have someone available for emergency review, maybe 6 hours, maybe 12 if they're backlogged. Hoffman's face flushed red. This is ridiculous. We don't even know if her repair is structurally sound. We're talking about risking a $50 million aircraft on the word of someone who fixed what your 3 engineering teams couldn't, James interrupted, speaking up for the first time. Maybe we should listen to her. The hangar fell silent. Sarah could hear her own heartbeat as Trevor weighed his options. Behind them, the Gulfstream sat ready to fly, her repair holding steady, engines proven. All that stood between success, and another week of delays was paperwork and prejudice. Do it, Trevor said finally. Get certified. We'll hold the aircraft until you're back. But as Sarah headed for her truck, she caught sight of Hoffman on his phone again, his voice too low to make out the words, but his expression making his intentions clear. Whatever he was planning, Sarah suspected her certification run was about to become much more complicated. Fighting back smart. The FAA district office in Phoenix hummed with late-night activity as Sarah sat across from examiner Patricia Williams, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who'd been reviewing aviation certifications since before Sarah enlisted. The emergency review had been approved, barely, after Sarah had convinced them that keeping a critical corporate aircraft grounded posed significant economic hardship. Your military record is impressive, Williams said, flipping through Sarah's service jacket. 3 tours, commendations for maintaining aircraft readiness under combat conditions, supervisory experience. Why haven't you pursued civilian certification? Before, Sarah chose her words carefully. Honestly, I never thought anyone would take me seriously. Most corporate aviation jobs require degrees I don't have, connections I don't have. Seemed like a waste of time and money I couldn't afford. Williams nodded thoughtfully. She'd seen too many qualified veterans struggle with the civilian transition, watched good people fall through cracks created by credentialism and bias. Well, your knowledge base is solid. I'm approving emergency A&P certification with inspection authorization. You'll need to complete the full paperwork within 90 days, but this will get you legal to work. As Sarah drove back toward Scottsdale, her temporary certification papers on the passenger seat felt like a small victory. But her phone had been buzzing with missed calls and texts. Something was happening at the hangar. She arrived to find the parking lot unusually crowded for midnight. Inside Hangar 7, a crowd had gathered around the Gulfstream. Trevor stood off to one side, his expression grim, while Dr. Hoffman held court near the aircraft with several men in expensive suits. Completely unauthorized modification, Hoffman was saying as Sarah approached. I've documented multiple safety violations, and our insurance carrier has been notified of the potential liability exposure. Sarah recognized one of the suited men from news articles, Marcus Carlyle himself, the jet's owner. His presence explained the crowd. Word had gotten out that his aircraft was still grounded, and apparently he'd come to see for himself what the hold-up was. "Mr. Blackwood," Sarah called out, holding up her certification papers. FAA emergency approval came through. The hangar fell silent. Hoffman's face went pale as he realized his regulatory roadblock had just crumbled. Carlyle turned toward Sarah with sharp, intelligent eyes. "You're the mechanic who found the problem?" His voice carried the crisp authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Yes, sir. And now I'm the certified mechanic who found the problem." Sarah handed her papers to Trevor, who scanned them quickly. "Emergency A&P with IA," Trevor announced, unable to hide his relief. "She's fully authorized to perform and sign off on the repair." Hoffman stepped forward desperately. "Sir, regardless of her certification status, I still maintain that this repair represents an unacceptable risk." "What risk?" Carlyle's voice cut like a blade. "The aircraft has been tested. The repair works. My meetings in Singapore are in 18 hours, and I've already lost millions in postponed deals because of this situation. The long-term structural integrity—" "Dr. Hoffman," Sarah interrupted quietly, "when's the last time you actually worked on an aircraft? Not supervised, not consulted, actually turned wrenches and made repairs?" The question hung in the air, like a challenge. Hoffman's mouth opened and closed without sound. "Because I spent 15 years keeping birds in the air under conditions that would make your worst day in this climate-controlled hangar look like a vacation. And in all that time I learned one thing: aircraft don't care about your credentials. They care about whether you can fix them." Carlyle studied Sarah with new interest. "And you're confident this repair will hold?" "Until you can get the proper replacement part installed, yes, sir." "I guarantee it." "With what?" Hoffman sputtered. "What could you possibly offer as collateral for a $50 million aircraft?" Sarah met his gaze steadily. "Everything I have. My house, my business, my future earnings. I put it all on the line because I know this repair is sound." The hangar fell silent again. Even Hoffman seemed stunned by the magnitude of her commitment. Carlyle walked over to examine Sarah's work firsthand, running his fingers along the precision clamp system she'd fabricated. "Elegant solution," he said finally. "Ingenious, actually. Why didn't our engineers think of this?" "Because they were looking for complicated answers to a simple problem," Sarah replied. "Sometimes the best solution is the straightforward one." Carlyle straightened and turned to face the group. "Prep the aircraft for departure. We leave for Singapore in 4 hours." As the crowd began to disperse, James approached Sarah with a grin. "That was beautiful. Did you see Hoffman's face when you asked about his hands-on experience?" But Sarah wasn't celebrating yet. She'd won this battle, but something in Hoffman's expression as he'd slunk away suggested the war wasn't over. And she had a feeling his next move would be more personal and more dangerous than regulatory roadblocks. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Enjoy your moment. It won't last long." Sarah deleted the message, but couldn't shake the feeling that her real troubles were just beginning. The tables turn. 3 days after the Gulfstream's successful flight to Singapore, Sarah was back in her garage workshop when her phone rang. The caller ID showed Scottsdale Executive Airport, but the voice wasn't Trevor's. "Ms. Martinez? This is Carol Jenkins from Airport Security. We need to speak with you immediately regarding allegations of sabotage." Sarah's blood ran cold. "Sabotage? What are you talking about?" "Please come to the security office. We have some questions about your work on Mr. Carlyle's aircraft." The drive to the airport felt like traveling through quicksand. Sarah's mind raced through possibilities. each more terrifying than the last. Had something happened to the Gulf Stream? Had her repair failed catastrophically? At the security office, she found herself facing not just Carol Jenkins, but two FAA investigators and, to her surprise, Dr. Hoffman. His expression was carefully neutral, but Sarah caught a flicker of satisfaction in his eyes. "Ms. Martinez," said the lead investigator, Agent Rebecca Foster, "we've received allegations that you may have deliberately caused the electrical problem you later discovered in Mr. Carlyle's aircraft." The accusation hit Sarah like a physical blow. That's ridiculous. Why would I do that?" "Financial motivation," Hoffman interjected smoothly. "You were clearly desperate for work, struggling financially. Create a problem, then position yourself as the only one who can solve it. It's actually quite clever." Agent Foster spread photos across the table, detailed shots of the bracket damage Sarah had found. Dr. Hoffman has pointed out some irregularities in the fracture pattern. The damage appears consistent with deliberate scoring rather than natural stress failure. Sarah studied the photos, her mind working frantically. The crack she'd found was real. She was certain of it. But looking at the images through hostile eyes, she could see how someone might interpret the clean edges and precise location as suspicious. "I didn't cause that damage," she said firmly. "I found it and fixed it." "Then how do you explain having the exact materials needed for such a specific repair?" Hoffman pressed. "The clamp system you fabricated was remarkably well suited to the problem, almost as if you'd planned for exactly that type of failure." Sarah felt the walls closing in. Her military training had taught her to keep multiple solutions ready for common problems. Of course, she'd had materials that could address electrical bracket failures, but explaining that now made her sound guilty. "I want to call a lawyer," she said quietly. Agent Foster nodded. "That's your right. But understand, Ms. Martinez, that we're dealing with federal aviation crimes here. If these allegations are substantiated, you're looking at serious prison time." As Sarah was escorted to a private room to make her call, she caught sight of Trevor in the hallway. His expression was pained. Clearly, he didn't believe the accusations, but his hands were tied by the investigation. But there was someone else she noticed, James Chen, the young veteran mechanic who'd supported her during the repair. He was speaking quietly with Agent Foster, and from his body language, Sarah got the impression he wasn't just there as a witness. Her lawyer, a public defender named Michael Rodriguez, who specialized in aviation cases, arrived within an hour. As he reviewed the allegations, his expression grew increasingly grim. "This is serious, Sarah. Sabotage of commercial aircraft is a federal crime with mandatory minimum sentences, but something about this doesn't add up." "What do you mean?" Rodriguez tapped the photos. "The timing. If you were going to sabotage an aircraft for financial gain, why wait until you were desperate? Why not do it when you had more resources to handle the investigation that would inevitably follow?" As they talked, Sarah began to piece together what was really happening. Hoffman's questions had been too specific, too well prepared, the evidence too perfectly arranged. This wasn't about justice. It was about destroying her credibility and, by extension, discrediting the idea that non-traditional mechanics could compete with established engineering firms. "There's something else," Rodriguez said, checking his AI notes. The young mechanic, James Chen, apparently came forward with additional information about the timeline. "He's claiming he saw you near the aircraft before the official repair call." Sarah's heart sank. James, the one person she'd thought understood her situation, had apparently turned against her. But as Rodriguez continued reading, his expression shifted. "Wait, that's not right. According to his statement, he saw you, but he also saw someone else. Someone who had access to the aircraft the night before the problem was first reported." Sarah leaned forward. "Who?" "Dr. Richard Hoffman. Apparently, Chen works security shifts to supplement his mechanic's income. He has access to the overnight surveillance footage. For the first time since the nightmare began, Sarah felt a spark of hope. If James had evidence that Hoffman was near the aircraft before the problem appeared, then maybe, just maybe, she could prove who had really sabotaged the Gulf Stream. But first, she had to survive the investigation. And with federal charges hanging over her head, survival was far from guaranteed. The truth emerges. The conference room at Scottsdale Executive Airport had been transformed into an impromptu courtroom. Agent Foster sat at one end of the table, flanked by FAA officials and airport security. Sarah sat with her lawyer, Michael Rodriguez, while across from them, Dr. Hoffman occupied a chair with the confidence of someone certain of victory. "Before we proceed with formal charges," Agent Foster announced, "we want to review all the evidence one more time. Mr. Chen, you requested to make an additional statement?" Chen stood up, a tablet in his hands, and a determined expression on his face. Sarah noticed his hands trembling slightly. Whatever he was about to say was costing him. "Yes, ma'am. I've been working double shifts here. Mechanic during the day, security at night. I review surveillance footage as part of my rounds." He glanced at Dr. Hoffman, whose confident expression was beginning to crack. 3 nights before Ms. Martinez was called in, I observed Dr. Hoffman accessing Hangar 7 at 2:47 a.m. The room fell silent. Hoffman's face flushed red. I was conducting routine inspections. Perfectly legitimate, with a toolkit, James continued. Because the footage shows you carrying what appears to be electronic equipment and tools. You were in the hangar for approximately 47 minutes. Agent Foster leaned forward. "Do you have this footage?" James nodded, connecting his tablet to the room's display screen. The security video was grainy but clear enough to show a figure matching Hoffman's build and height entering the hangar in the early morning hours, carrying what was unmistakably a tool bag. "This proves nothing," Hoffman blustered. "I regularly inspect aircraft systems. It's part of my job." "At 3 a.m., Sarah's lawyer interjected. "Without logging the inspection or informing management?" But James wasn't finished. "There's more. Ms. Martinez, you mentioned that the crack was hairline thin, barely visible even with magnification." "That's right. But Dr. Hoffman, in your initial report about finding the damage suspicious, you described it as precision scoring with clean edges. How could you make such a detailed assessment of damage that was supposedly barely visible?" The question hung in the air like a sword. Hoffman's mouth opened and closed without sound. Agent Foster studied the timeline James had prepared. "Dr. Hoffman, you're saying the damage was there when Ms. Martinez arrived, but you had detailed knowledge of its characteristics before any formal investigation. Can you explain that?" The photographs clearly show," Hoffman fumbled for words. "The photographs were taken after Ms. Martinez's repair was removed for evidence," Rodriguez pointed out. "You described the precision scoring in your initial complaint before any detailed photography was done." Sarah watched Hoffman's facade crumbling in real time. The man who had seemed so confident in his accusations was now sweating under the weight of his own contradictions. "There's one more thing," James said quietly. "The electronic signature logs for hangar access. Dr. Hoffman's keycard was used to enter Hangar 7 17 times in the 2 weeks before the Gulf Stream problem was first reported. Most of those entries were after hours with no logged maintenance activities." Agent Foster made notes rapidly. "Dr. Hoffman, can you account for these after-hours visits?" "This is harassment," Hoffman snapped, his composure finally breaking completely. "You're taking the word of some security guard over a credentialed engineer with 15 years of experience." "Some security guard?" James's voice hardened. I'm a veteran, just like Ms. Martinez. I spent 6 years maintaining helicopters in Iraq and Afghanistan. I know sabotage when I see it, and I know integrity when I see it too. The room erupted as Hoffman lunged toward James, his professional mask completely stripped away. You people need to learn your place. I've worked my entire career to reach this level, and I won't have it undermined by some affirmative action hiring program. Airport security restrained Hoffman as Agent Foster called for order. In his rage, he'd revealed what Sarah had suspected. All along, this wasn't about aviation safety or proper procedures. It was about maintaining a system that kept the right people in power and everyone else out. Dr. Hoffman, Agent Foster said coldly, you're under arrest for sabotage of commercial aircraft, filing false federal reports, and attempted obstruction of justice. As Hoffman was led away in handcuffs, still protesting his innocence and ranting about unqualified personnel, Sarah felt a weight lift from her shoulders that she hadn't even realized she'd been carrying. Trevor approached her as the room cleared. Sarah, I owe you an apology. I should have trusted my instincts about your work instead of letting Hoffman's credentials intimidate me. You were protecting the company, Sarah replied. I understand. No, you don't understand. Trevor's voice was firm. Mr. Carlyle wants to meet with you. He has a proposition. The confrontation. Marcus Carlyle's office occupied the top floor of a glass tower in downtown Scottsdale with panoramic views of the desert mountains. Sarah had expected opulence, but the space was surprisingly functional, more like a workshop than a boardroom, with aircraft components and engineering prototypes scattered across work surfaces. Ms. Martinez? Carlyle rose from behind a desk that looked like it had been salvaged from a military airfield. Thank you for coming. Please, sit. Sarah took the offered chair, still processing the events of the past week. Hoffman's arrest had made local news, and her phone hadn't stopped ringing with interview requests and job offers. I've been thinking about what happened, Carlyle continued. Dr. Hoffman's sabotage, your repair, the investigation, it's revealed some troubling patterns in how we evaluate talent in this industry. He walked to a wall display showing organizational charts for various aviation companies. Look at these leadership structures, MIT, Stanford, Caltech, all excellent schools, but notice what's missing. Sarah studied the charts. The pattern was obvious once pointed out, a homogeneous collection of similar backgrounds, similar thinking, similar blind spots. Practical experience, she said. Exactly. We've created an industry that values credentials over competence, theory over practice. And it's made us vulnerable to exactly the kind of problem you solved. Simple, real-world issues that require intuitive understanding, not just academic knowledge. Carlyle returned to his desk, pulling out a thick folder. I'm starting a new division, Advanced Problem Solving in Aviation Maintenance. I want you to head it. Sarah blinked. I'm sorry, what? You'd be responsible for tackling the aircraft problems that stump traditional engineering approaches. You'd also develop training programs that combine academic rigor with hands-on experience, the kind that could prevent another Hoffman situation. The offer was staggering, not just the salary, which was more than Sarah had ever imagined earning, but the opportunity to reshape how the industry thought about maintenance and problem-solving. There's one condition, Carlyle added. This division would prioritize hiring veterans and other non-traditional candidates, people with real-world experience who've been overlooked by conventional hiring practices. Sarah felt tears threatening. After months of rejection and financial desperation, after being dismissed and sabotaged, she was being offered the chance to not just rebuild her own life, but to open doors for others facing the same struggles. Why? She asked. Why take this risk? Carlyle smiled. Because Dr. Hoffman cost me millions with his sabotage and 3 engineering teams couldn't solve what you fixed in 2 hours. That's not ideology, that's mathematics. He stood and extended his hand. So, do we have a deal? But before Sarah could answer, her phone buzzed with an urgent text from James. "Turn on the news, Hoffman's talking." On the office television, a reporter stood outside the federal courthouse where Dr. Richard Hoffman, recently released on bail, was giving an impromptu press conference. His face was haggard, his usual polished appearance replaced by the desperate look of a man whose world was collapsing. "I maintain my innocence," he was saying. "This entire situation is a manufactured crisis designed to promote unqualified individuals at the expense of properly trained professionals. The aviation industry has safety standards for a reason, and we ignore them at our peril." A reporter shouted a question. "Dr. Hoffman, surveillance footage shows you accessing the hangar where the Gulfstream was damaged. How do you explain that?" "Routine." "Inspections. I was doing my job, ensuring aircraft safety. Now I'm being persecuted because I refused to rubber stamp substandard repairs by unqualified personnel." Sarah watched in fascination as Hoffman dug his hole deeper with every word. His lawyer was visible in the background, frantically trying to get him to stop talking, but Hoffman was beyond reason. "The real crime here," he continued, "is the systematic replacement of qualified engineers with diversity hires and military personnel who lack the educational foundation necessary for complex aviation work." "Jesus!" Carlyle muttered, turning off the television. "His lawyer must be having a heart attack." Sarah stared at the blank screen, thinking about all the veterans she'd known who'd struggled to find meaningful work after their service. Good. People with valuable skills who'd been dismissed because their experience didn't fit neat categories. "Mr. Carlyle," she said slowly, "I accept your offer. But I want to add one more condition." "What's that?" "When this story goes public, and it will, I want to make sure the message is clear. This isn't about replacing qualified people with unqualified ones. It's about expanding our definition of what qualifies someone to excel." Carlyle nodded approvingly. "I couldn't agree more." As Sarah signed the contract that would change her life, she thought about David and the dreams they'd shared about her finding a place where her skills were valued. She thought about James Chen and his courage in speaking truth to power. And she thought about all the other veterans still struggling to find their place in civilian life. Dr. Hoffman had tried to destroy her to protect his narrow view of who belonged in aviation. Instead, he'd opened a door that could never be closed again. Full circle. 6 months later, Sarah stood in the lobby of the newly opened Veterans Aviation Training Center, watching as 23 former military mechanics filed into their first day of civilian certification classes. The facility, funded by Carlyle Industries and partnered with 3 major airlines, represented everything she'd hoped to achieve. "Nervous?" James Chen approached, wearing the crisp uniform of the center's assistant director. His promotion from security guard to management had been one of Sarah's first personnel decisions. "Excited," Sarah corrected, straightening her own uniform. "Director of Advanced Problem Solving, Veterans Aviation Training Center." The title still felt surreal. These 23 represent just the beginning. Through the lobby windows, she could see the hangar where it all started. The same Gulfstream sat there now, fully repaired with the proper replacement bracket, serving as both a training aircraft and a symbol of what was possible when talent was recognized regardless of its source. Trevor Blackwood emerged from the administrative offices, tablet in hand as always, but his demeanor towards Sarah had transformed completely. "The latest numbers are in," he announced with satisfaction. "Our graduate placement rate is 94%, average starting salary is 38% higher than traditional entry-level positions. The statistics represented more than career success. They were lives changed, families stabilized, potential realized. Sarah thought of David's medical bills, now finally paid off with her new salary, and her mother's medications, no longer a source of anxiety. "Any word on the Hoffman trial?" James asked. "Sentencing is next week," Trevor replied. "Federal prosecutors are recommending 18 months plus restitution. His engineering firm dropped him immediately after the investigation went public." Sarah felt no satisfaction in Hoffman's downfall. His actions had been despicable, but she understood the fear that had driven them, the terror of being replaced, of discovering that your credentials might not be as valuable as you'd believed. The difference was that she'd channeled her own fears into helping others, while he'd chosen destruction. "There's something else," Trevor continued, consulting his tablet. "Marcus wants to see you in conference room A. He says it's important." Sarah found Carlyle waiting with a woman she didn't recognize, mid-50s, sharp-eyed, wearing a military dress uniform with enough ribbons to indicate serious rank. "Sarah, I'd like you to meet General Patricia Hayes, Director of Military Transition Services for the Department of Defense." General Hayes stood and offered a firm handshake. "Ms. Martinez, I've been following your work here with great interest. The Pentagon is facing a serious challenge. We're losing talented people who can't find appropriate civilian employment after their service. Your model here could be the solution." Sarah felt a familiar flutter of nerves. "What kind of solution?" "National expansion," Carlyle interjected, his eyes bright with enthusiasm. "DoD wants to fund similar centers in 12 major cities. They're offering a partnership that would make this program available to veterans nationwide." The magnitude of the proposal hit Sarah like a wave. From desperately seeking work to fix her own financial crisis, she was now being offered the chance to reshape veteran employment across the entire country. "The catch," General Hayes continued, "is that they want you to oversee the entire program. It would mean extensive travel, congressional testimony, working with corporate partners and military leadership. Are you prepared for that level of responsibility?" Sarah thought about the phone calls she still received weekly. Veterans who'd heard her story and were seeking guidance. Employers who wanted to understand how to better evaluate non-traditional candidates. Families grateful that their loved ones had found meaningful work. "General, 6 months ago I was about to lose my house because I couldn't find anyone willing to hire a veteran without a college degree. If this program can prevent other families from going through that struggle, then yes, I'm prepared." "No, Bruce," Hayes smiled. "I hoped you'd say that. There's one more thing. We want to establish the Sarah Martinez Fellowship for Veteran Aviation Professionals, full scholarship program for former military personnel pursuing civilian aviation careers." Sarah felt tears threatening. Having a fellowship named after her seemed impossible. She was just a mechanic who'd gotten lucky, found the right crack in the right bracket at the right time. "It's not luck," Carlyle said, as if reading her thoughts. "You saw what others missed because you combined technical knowledge with intuitive understanding. You stood up to pressure because you knew your worth even when others didn't recognize it, and you used your success to lift others instead of just enriching yourself. That's not luck, that's character." The ceremony that afternoon was attended by local news crews, veteran organizations, and aviation industry leaders. Sarah found herself at a podium, looking out at an audience that included her mother, finally healthy and proud, and dozens of her new graduates in their crisp uniforms. 8 months ago," she began, "I was a struggling veteran who couldn't get anyone to take my experience seriously. I thought my military service was a handicap in the civilian world. I was wrong. She paused, spotting James in the audience, now wearing the uniform of a senior instructor, preparing to lead his own classes. Military service isn't a handicap, it's an asset that civilian employers are finally learning to value. But this transformation didn't happen because someone in power decided to be charitable. It happened because we proved our worth, one successful repair at a time, one solved problem at a time. In the back of the room, she noticed several other aviation companies had sent representatives. Word was spreading that veteran hires weren't charity cases, they were competitive advantages. The best part of this story isn't that one veteran found success, it's that we've created a pathway for thousands more to follow. We've changed how an entire industry thinks about talent and qualifications. As the ceremony concluded and attendees mingled in the reception area, Sarah stepped outside for a moment of quiet reflection. The desert sunset painted the mountains. In brilliant oranges and purples, the same colors she'd seen during countless evenings in Afghanistan. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Ms. Martinez, I'm a Navy veteran struggling to find work in civilian aviation. I heard about your program. Is there hope for someone like me? Sarah smiled as she typed her response. There's always hope. Send me your information and let's talk about getting you certified. As she headed back inside to rejoin the celebration, Sarah reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought her here. A simple repair job had become a catalyst for industry-wide change. A moment of desperation had transformed into a mission of empowerment. Dr. Hoffman had tried to sabotage her career to protect his narrow vision of who belonged in aviation. Instead, he'd inadvertently launched a movement that was opening doors for thousands of qualified veterans across the country. Sarah Martinez had started as a struggling veteran mechanic who could barely pay her bills. She was ending as a national advocate for military talent with the resources and platform to change lives on a massive scale. The broken bracket that had stumped 3 engineering teams had done more than ground a luxury jet. It had cracked open an entire industry's assumptions about merit, qualifications, and opportunity. And for Sarah, that was the most elegant repair of all. The end. Author's note: this story was inspired by the countless veterans who possess incredible skills and experience but face barriers in transitioning to civilian careers. While the specific events are fictional, the challenges faced by military personnel seeking civilian employment are very real, as are the innovative programs working to bridge that gap. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.